Manson,
Present.
Templin, Lane,
Here.
Huggins,
Here.
Milburn,
Here comes Roger now.
Meddock, Schultz.
Here.
Commissioner Meddock is absent. And did you say he was coming in?
Yep.
Okay.
You've been reprieved.
Howdy. Hello. This doesn't just kind of suck. It sucks. Sorry.
It's all right. We just did roll call, so you're on.
Howdy.
We've already made all the wet jokes, so you don't have to.
Okay. What it is?
Nothing. We're ready for general business.
Just did roll call.
Okay.
And I guess we were thinking about doing the presentation on Clearview City first, and and then hold the public hearing second.
Okay, so we've done nothing other than roll call.
That's it.
Correct.
Okay. So item 3A, approve the planning commission agenda. Suggest there's a change in the agenda.
Just the order of, we'll do the new business first.
7A before 5A.
Correct.
It's been suggested. Any objections?
Make a motion, we approve the agenda with the recommended changes.
Second.
Second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Approved. Item 3B, approve the minutes of the planning commission meeting held July 23rd, 2024. Changes, corrections, additions to be noted?
Make a motion, we approve the minutes.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Approved. Item 3C, disclosure of conflicts of interest. Anyone need anything to disclose in terms of what's on the agenda tonight?
Nope.
Seeing none. Item 3D, disclosure of outside communications regarding commission business. Anyone been talked to about these items?
Nope.
This time is time for call to the public. Members of the public who wish to address the planning commission regarding items not on the agenda may do so at this time. Any presentations for informational purposes only, no action will be taken. There's a 4-minute time limit. Would anyone like to address the planning commission? Seeing no one rush the podium, I'm assuming we have no one online.
No one online.
I'll close the call to the public. Item 7A, Clearview City Plan Development Presentation.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've actually just, before the meeting, even though I knew this was coming, received a rezoning application for a PD for Clearview City. We've met with the developer, Dave Rhodes, and his team, Wheatland, and I will turn the podium over to him to kind of go through the development process, all the things he's been through with the Kansas Historic Preservation Office. He did also do a brief presentation to the City Council, the previous meeting. But because it's a PD, I thought it's important to get to the Planning Commission first and maybe flush out any questions, comments that you have versus just spring a whole PD on you, because we get into the architectural features. It isn't just a straight land use rezoning. There's a lot of detail and intricacy to a PD project. So they did give me the drawings, so you do have those information in your packet. It's really a long-awaited moment for DeSoto. We looked at Clearview City as an opportunity in many ways, especially now with Panasonic being right across the street essentially for workforce housing. It is something that really can be a benefit to the city, benefit to the employment centers that will ultimately be at the Sunflower Ammunition Plant, and really return that area to what it once really was, which was a family-oriented workforce housing that really helped DeSoto for many years prior to the ammunition plant being closed down in the early 80s. So with that basic preamble, I was just going to let Dave talk about the project, some of the things he's been through recently as far as dealing with the state, some of the opportunities that he's seen. And also, I think it's important to know that it's not just our architectural standards and things that we've got to look at. He's got the Historic Preservation Office that he also has to meet their standards. So we've got a pretty solid check and balance for what's going to happen out there. So with that, I will turn the floor over to you, Dave, and
Quick question, this is just strictly.
presentation. We're not taking any action tonight. Yeah, I do have a public hearing scheduled for our next meeting.
Understood. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dave Rhodes, and I have with me tonight Susie Rhodes, who's part of the development team, and Aaron Gaspers with CFS Engineering. Commissioners online, we have Kelsey and Devin as well as part of our development team, but
Oh, Dave, were they gonna be on the Zoom call?
I think so.
Okay, I didn't see him.
Okay.
So,
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the other name?
Aaron Gaspers with CFS
Thank you.
and Susie Rhodes. We purchased Clearview City, just to give you a little history about the Wheatland team. We purchased Clearview City in October of 2001, 30 days after 9/11, actually October 11th, 2001. We've owned the property and operated it, and we self-manage everything that we own. In 2014, we went to the State Historic Society, spent almost a year getting it designated as an historic place. This is a planned community. There's one other in Prairie Village in the state of Kansas, and that's the only two back in the 40s that were done. Dunn Construction actually was the builder, and the architect, I think, was Hare and Associates. So if you look back at the history of this, it's pretty amazing on what was out there in 1942 and how quickly they built it. Most everything out there is 85 years old underground. So one of the things that is critical for us to do the renovation, we felt like if we did everything above ground, if everything underground wasn't replaced, we really haven't accomplished anything. The water lines, the sewer lines, the sanitary lines, the streets, the sidewalks, everything we want to do. Our vision is to completely overhaul this place and bring it back to a simulation of the picture down in the lower right. There's currently about 238 occupied units. We want to take all the boarded up units that have been boarded up for years and have 341 units. We feel with Panasonic, with the city of DeSoto, this would be a tremendous workforce housing project to put in place. We will keep it affordable. We applied for tax credits with Kansas Housing Resource Corporation, and our intent is to own this for the next 15 to 30 years and keep it affordable. So with that said, you can roll through some of the slides that are kind of fun to look at. The old kitchen down in the lower right, floating shelves, they had the washboard sinks, and there was a school back behind. And then the construction, and if you go to the Johnson County Historical Museum site, you can actually look at a lot of the construction from the beginning. The corner building up there on the top right, that's an old Walgreens drugstore. There was a supermarket there. There was a beauty salon, a post office. When they consolidated all the satellite post offices, they closed this particular post office. But our intent is to bring that building back to and get some historic placards and put what was there originally on the outside of the building so that you can see historically what it was. Our vision is really to make an affordable housing project to compete with people that are bringing ground up new construction. Our rents will be very competitive. And we just hope the city agrees, and we'd like to come back in about a month and have a public hearing and then hopefully be able to get you all approval and move to the city council. Aaron Gaspers is here with CFS, and I think he'll be able to explain some other things to you.
Thank you. Aaron with CFS. I mean, as Dave said, in short, we plan to do a full rehab and remodel of the building and full on-site reconstruction. It is a daunting task in front of us, being a occupied facility, so there will be phases to it. But we're looking at rehabbing into 2 and 3 units per building with patios, some with garages and driveways. The office building would also be rehabbed. Way down in the future, we've got a piece there on the southwest corner for phase 2 for some additional buildings. The commercial building would be looked at some point in the future, as well as the old construction office that's to the west of the office building. The site reconstruction would include sanitary, water line, and storm sewer replacement. All the sanitary would be 8-inch minimum and would connect to the north side to the proposed benefit district that's in the works and would be installed at that location. The water line that exists on site is really undersized. The pipe sizes range from 1 to 6 inch and has multiple dead ends at the ends of the alleys and the streets. We would put in all 8-inch water line and loop the entire thing. There would not be one dead end. The entire property is about 75 acres, and it has existing only about 5 or 6 storm structures on the north side of Lake Shore. We would install new storm sewer and run storm sewer up Lake Shore, Village, Strawberry, and Rosewood Drives. The streets, full reconstruction of the streets and the alleys, and kind of stepping into part of the reason that this is we'd like to do the PD is it gives us a little design flexibility within that zoning. Because we have to hit historic standards, you know, those streets are going to be designed about a 24-foot width as opposed to the city 28-foot width. Our alleys are 10 feet wide. There's off the street parking that we're going to rebuild, similar to what's out there today. We're going to add site lighting and landscaping as well. The street connections to Sunflower would be maintained at Sunshine Drive, and we would also look to add one at the northeast corner, extending Lake Shore and creating a street connection over there at Sunflower. Village and Lake Shore connections at 103rd would be maintained as right in and right out, as per the recently reconstructed 103rd Street. Some work on the ponds on the northwest side would also take place to look at lowering that 100-year water surface elevation and detaining for that future phase 2. This area on the northwest side would be put in a tract and identified as the common and active open space with picnic areas and playgrounds and things of that nature. As mentioned, we'll be back in a month. We submitted today for the rezoning and the preliminary development plan. After that, we have final development plan work to do, final plat work to do, as well as getting into all the construction drawings, both on the architectural and engineering side. Permitting as well. So, as I said at the beginning, it's a daunting task. There's a lot of work to do, but I think definitely this will be a rewarding project and something we can all look back and point at and be proud of. That about sums it up for me. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Are there any designated storm shelters out there, or do you plan on putting any in?
We currently do not have any storm shelters. We plan to put it in. We've continually talked about it, or what we have found in our other projects. We have projects in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas, and it's almost worse to get people outside to come to a building if there's a severe storm. than having something available to, like you have here. We probably will not have storms shelters in each park.
And, I've worked with the Historic Society before, and I know it's kind of interesting with, what you can replace and what you can't and replace with like circumstances. So will you have to keep the concrete block structures and, or the windows, or is there anything that you have to keep when you're doing the remodel?
Well,
Yes.
yes. In short, yes, there are things that we're gonna have to keep. There's some of the, correct me if I'm wrong, the CMU unit walls will have to stay exposed that are currently exposed. Really, the Historic Society said generally keep it as existing. You know, so that's kind of, with any questions, that's kind of our first answer, both architecturally in the building and on the site.
And Linda, if there was an existing window, it may have to still remain an existing window on the outside, but the inside, it could be covered up. It's the exterior that's really important on each of these buildings. We can't tear them down. We have to use, but we're trying to figure out a way to take that existing stucco off back to the block, and then figure out a way to protect that, paint it, coat it, so that it looks a lot better than the current stucco that's on it.
Good, yeah. I used to do rehab or, you know, LATHA for private housing. And I know we did some of them that were on the Historic Society, and it was like, oh my gosh. It's rather, like you said, it's a daunting task sometimes.
We calculated there's 161 buildings, and we think there's 30 to 35 some scopes within each 161 buildings. So it is, and then to get the approval of not only this city, but ship out historic people, it's very time consuming.
Well, and there's sometimes cheaper ways to do it, but when you're dealing with that, you've got to play that into the factor as well, so it's not quite as easy to do.
But we do plan to replace windows and doors.
Good. That will be a big help for
We
people.
have to replace them back to historic approval.
All right, thank you.
Will there be public sewer extended this project by the time it's done?
Yes, the plan is to rebuild the streets within and plat right-of-way, easements outside of the right-of-way, and the sewer and the water and the storm would intend, as well as the streets, would intend to result to be public.
Yeah, but is there sewer extended to Clearview City?
Currently, there's a lagoon system that services Clearview City. There's 3 cells that are on the east side of Sunflower Road. We have joined in the benefit district of the new sewer that's being built, will be built, to hook up to the lift station by the dog park there on 95th Street. We will connect to that sewer in our scope, the city sewers. And
Is there a timeline
eventually,
when that'll be done?
July 25 is the proposed date.
Install?
The lift station,
Oh, the lift station.
not the lift station, the lift station, and I believe the sewer.
Yeah,
district.
the
July
sunflower,
25.
sunflower benefit district, the sewer extension that comes from the lift station near the dog park up this drainage area back is set to be in by the middle of 25.
Wow. Okay.
And what we would like to do is, if for some reason that is not available, we would continue to use the lagoons until it is available, and then we would switch over
Yeah.
to the sewer.
And even then, there may be also other backup plans we could talk
Correct.
about.
Okay, so in 1 year, there will be a manhole sitting at the northeast corner of that property.
That's the plan.
Okay, awesome. Good.
questions, discussion?
Sounds quite a project. Yeah, sounds great.
Last time I did a PD was at least 20 years ago. So, have you guys done many of those recently?
I think the
No.
last one, Joe's thing, right, is planned development,
Which Joe's thing?
right? Across from JC's. I don't know what.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah.
Her name
Possum
is.
Creek, but that was that uptown
Is that a
Oakland.
PD?
Possum Creek?
So it was not a PD, it
I
was.
don't think it was.
Yeah, it was a little different. It acted a lot like a PD, but it
Yeah.
wasn't exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would suggest review the provisions of our code on PDs and probably be familiar with it because we haven't done one in a while.
One thing I noticed was it allowed industrial.
But it's gotta be as
Well,
part of the plan.
Yeah.
Essentially, it
So-
allows anything almost.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any use that's restricted under a PD. It's in the plan.
But the biggest part is that the PD is basically complete, and if you make changes to it, you've got to come back and do it again. So I'm sure the applicant's very familiar with how that works.
That is correct.
So we're not planning on piecemeal this for us, right?
No, the idea is that the preliminary development plan, not only in that picture up there, will reflect the reconstruction of the existing, but we will reflect the phase two, as I mentioned, in the southwest corner. The commercial building and the office are all a part of the preliminary development plan. And then the final development plan will be submitted for, phase one, right? So if the phase two residential gets submitted way down the line, we can start at the final development plan phase as long as it matches the preliminary development plan phase. And if it doesn't, we have to go back and revise the preliminary as well.
Is that right?
Yeah, that's generally correct.
Okay.
So will this all be residential? Or are you planning on having some commercial type in there too, like they did in the old days?
Well, that building east of the office,
Mhm.
that was commercial in the past.
Mhm.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you intend to do commercial for
We intend to try to use
that.
that as commercial as well,
Mhm.
as it
Makes
was in the
sense.
past.
Sure.
The property, all of it's zoned commercial right now, the whole 78-acre parcel.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
And there used to actually be a whole lot more east of Sunflower Road,
Yeah.
Sunflower.
I know
There
Dan
used-
said there
there
used to
used
be
to
a
be a
bowling
lot
alley out
more
there and things.
Housing
like
and
that.
stuff over there.
Uh-huh.
They had a movie theater,
Oh,
bowling alley, all
yeah.
kinds of stuff.
Sure.
Bowling alley, there's a bowling alley, a movie theater, and about 300 units
A lot of the houses that used to be there, they're kind of spread out through
scattered.
some part here in DeSoto, and there's a few in Olathe, and
In the 70s, if you could bring $1,000 and remove the trailer, it was yours on that east side.
Wow.
So the picture that we're looking at, the black outline is kind of the general area that you're talking about submitting for, correct?
That would be basically the all-encompassing phase one of the project.
Okay. So the part that's cut out along 103rd, that's the building, isn't that the building that used to have the post office in it?
Yes.
Yes.
That's not gonna be part of this.
No.
Not this initial phase.
Okay.
No.
So this would be, everything that's within that black line is kind of what we're talking about. That doesn't include that building.
Correct.
Correct. And that vacant land is where the old 300 block used to be of Sunflower Village. And that is what will come back in 4 or 5 years and build additional,
This here, Dave.
that area.
Okay.
Okay.
So all of these street improvements will be 24 foot, and there won't be any collector style roadways like the one that goes north along the west side.
No, it's all 24 foot. That's pretty much on average what the existing roads are out there. And that's kind of what we need to hit historically is rebuild what's out there. Pretty much when you get in between, like up Rosewood or Sunflower, they also have the off-street parking next to it. So by the time you have parking on both sides of 24-foot road, there's not, and you get sidewalks, there's not much more room to the buildings.
Now, I'm assuming your plan is gonna prohibit on-street parking with streets like, right?
Yeah, there's gonna be just like you see the perpendicular parking there.
Spots that are there, but not on the street.
Correct. And there's gonna be plenty of that off-street parking.
So I would assume the plan development standards don't allow for, you know, 24-foot street for the kind of traffic flows that will be on those streets. I don't know. Is that something that'll have to be an exception to the standard?
Yeah, you know, without them in front of me, just kind of going by memory, but I think they do allow, specifically the PD does specifically allow for variances like that from the typical city standard or block length or, you know, pedestrian access. I think it's kind of specifically intended to, so that we can consider those sorts of deviations from the standard.
Traffic flow, volumes.
Yeah, again, without it in front of me, I'm sure it doesn't get that specific, but it in general it just says, you know, this planned process affords the planning commission, the city, the flexibility to consider deviations like that if we determine that safety and life and health and, you know, welfare is not in jeopardy.
Yeah, I'm not sure that the code reads that way. That it says it should consist with general standards for land use, et cetera, public facilities and development as set out in the regulations, so I'm not quite sure it's that.
There's a line that says a description of any deviations from any other provisions of these regulations and the reason for such. I don't know, is that?
So maybe some specific finding has to be made on that.
Right. Oh, we still have.
Where did you see that?
Oh,
here you go.
7G.
Development plan.
Yeah, 7G.
Yeah. So within the preliminary development plan, you've got to call out deviations and why you did it. And I suppose some good reason why is for historical purposes. And
Right.
I guess my point, Mike, is I don't think that it's necessarily a free pass from all regulations.
Sure. Sure. I didn't mean to suggest it was.
You gotta abide by them unless we can find some good reason to explain why we're not.
Well, I mean, I would be concerned about people living there, and they're gonna be probably driving a lot more than they were in the 40s. A lot of traffic. You can't get around. It might affect the use of that.
We currently have about 8% of the population of Minnesota currently living there. So our traffic flows have not been bad at all on those streets.
Well, certainly is an issue we'll want to talk about, right?
Absolutely.
Okay. Anything else you want to share on this?
I look forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
Long overdue.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, thank
Thanks
you.
for the
Appreciate your time.
presentation.
Thank you.
That brings us to a public hearing to consider a text amendment for lot sizes. Item 5A.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We talked about this at our previous meeting, and some of the items that were brought back to planning, or things we talked about, were the width in the R3 district, whether to modify the R2A district or the R2 district, and also architectural features, some potential architectural features to be added to the code to keep a real repetitive or extremely similar type housing on these potential 50-foot wide lots. And basically, I guess I'll start with the R2 changing from the R2A, which is what I had initially proposed last time. I think made a lot of sense. So basically, R2A district will remain unchanged. The R1 district will remain unchanged. So what has been modified is the R2 district, which allows for 50-foot wide lots for a single family and a 60-foot wide lot for R2 for duplexes. Also, there's been some changes to the square footage for each lot, so obviously it does match. They're both 120 feet deep, so if you do the math, they're 6,000 for single family, 7,200 for two family, equates to either a 50 by 120 or a 60 by 120 lot. Also, one thing that changed was the front yard, the corner, the non-primary lot. We've got our standard in the city code is the front yards are basically the same. We do designate a primary front and a non-primary front. But in this case, I mean, ultimately, you have to kind of think about the whole goal of this whole thing is, do we want to hopefully keep down some costs, allow development, some flexibility to put more units on the same amount of property that our previous code would have allowed, which in turn will hopefully lower the cost or make it a little bit more affordable. We've been talking about this issue, and Roger, you were on our housing committee several years ago with several council members and the mayor and Mike and myself, where we talked about it. Justin, I think you were on it as well. We talked a lot about trying to keep down costs and came up with some recommendations then, but this one wasn't even on the radar screen. And not too many communities at that point had adopted this type of reduced lot widths. But since that time, Gardner, Lenexa have added, I believe Spring Hills also has a 50-foot wide lot. I've reduced that because the developers are putting the costs in the housing. That's what people are wanting. And I think part of that's a little bit of a COVID issue too, where if you're going to be in your house, you want to have features and things that you want to have that are nicer and upgraded, and the outside yard isn't as important, or the space that the outside yard provides. So with that, we've looked at this 50-foot lot, and Commissioner Milburn put together this sketch to show that on a sample, you could get up to, and this with a 500-foot cul-de-sac, you could get 5 additional lots potentially for a 500-foot, or 5 additional lots on a 500-foot cul-de-sac with a reduction in the lot size. So that's our recommendation, is to go along those lines. The other thing that we talked about was the R3 district. We do have a provision in there where single family can be reduced to, or we did have a provision, or pardon me, we currently have a provision where it can be a 60-foot wide lot in the R3 district. And my thinking after listening to our discussion, talking about that should be consistent with the R2 district. Because the one thing our code does allow is you can go from if you have an R3 development, you can have multifamily, or you can have duplexes and single family and not have to rezone specifically to that district. So I've made that suggested change to you all as well. And then finally, the architectural features. Talked to several of the developers, and there were several different options that we could have done. Some of them were, limit the width of the garage so it isn't just this big imposing structure sticking out in front. In most cases, garages do stick out. Some of them was to limit the amount that the garage could be in front of the primary house. So you can see that top drawing on the left, the garage sticks out a little bit. The one on the right isn't so much. And also with the front porch to require some, columns or additional features. And then even we talked about, different types of siding, where they have shake shingles on the front, some other things like that. And as we got into those things, it really, and then we got into, I was talking to Cameron and Patrick and Mike about all these things, and it's like, man, it's going to get a little unwieldy for staff to make these decisions as lots get sold to certain developers, and then all of a sudden the last guy in has got to make all these additional changes because we don't want anybody right next to them to have the exact same house. The other thing that came up with the discussions with the developers is people do want uniqueness with their own property, even though maybe it's a similar house plan or something very close. You know, giving them the opportunity for the different types of stones or the different colors, different shutters, things like that, kind of naturally happen. And so ultimately, my recommendation at this point is not to touch those or not include those architectural features. And hopefully, and I say hopefully, it seems like the places that I've visited, and there's a few around Johnson County that are having these narrow lots, that there's enough difference in what homeowners want to see, and also the developers don't want to just put up cookie cutter type, same shotgun houses row after row, because I think it does help helps with their pricing as far as being able to sell things and convince people to move to their neighborhoods. So with that, I'll stand for any questions you might have, but those were the sort of the three things that we talked about, was the changing from R2A to R2, consistency with the R3, and then also the architectural features. So with that, open the floor to any discussion we have, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. So I was a little unclear. So the R2A will stay R2A, it's just going to be unchanged.
Correct, because it has that site plan review feature in there, so that would have to be brought to the planning commission if they wanted to pursue that.
So this is a change to R2 and R3, essentially to make that width modification to allow for building on smaller width lots.
That is correct.
The examples you gave from Lenexa and Shawnee, so it looks like is Lenexa gone to planned development for everything?
They pretty much have. Now, they do have the standard things in their zoning code, because there's a big part of Lenexa that was developed after they had gone to the planned development for almost everything, so they do have their traditional zoning districts, but.
So like, for example, in Lenexa, if you wanted to do a subdivision like this, you'd have to go through their planned development process.
As I understand it, yes.
So, just to clarify on that, because I've submitted stuff in Lenexa, if you do a preliminary plat and you have a deviation from the code, you can mark that on the preliminary plat, say, hey, instead of the 60-foot wide lot, these are 55s. And you just have to highlight that on the preliminary plat. This is the 55-foot
So they
lot.
don't make you rezone it.
Oh, yeah, you still rezone it to RP1.
Okay.
But
So
then
it's
if you
gotta
have,
be a planned zone.
yeah, right. But if you have a deviation below the requirement, then you just mark it on the preliminary plat, and then the planning commission would approve that lot being deviated from.
Okay. So the process is a planned zone.
Essentially, yes.
And Gardner doesn't do
No, they do not. They're more like we are. They have zoning districts that they adhere to.
I suppose it's a public hearing. Are there any other questions for Brad?
Yeah, I guess I got just a couple of questions. I think generally Brad summarized all the stuff we talked about, but there's a couple things that I do want to talk about, like the R2, you added the yard regulation on D, the front yard, the corner yard, non-primary 15 feet. I guess I generally agree with that if the lot is in the same block. Now, if it's not in the same block, a good example would be if you pull up Arbor Ridge, I'll show exactly what I'm talking about. If it's not in the same block, then that house could sit farther in front of another house, so it looks a little weird. It'd be like whatever street that is. Can you zoom in a little bit there, Mike? Yeah, 84 Terrace, be on the east side. The north house, on the north side of 84 Terrace, right there, that house there. So that's what I'm talking about there. That would be that house not in the same block as the houses to the north. So if you would go with that requirement, that house could be 10 foot in, and it'd be out of line with all the houses coming down the west side.
So this setback here to Lamar Street
Yep.
could be, I see.
So then what I'm talking about is where Brad's comment would come into play would be this next cell. That's
Here.
in the same block.
This
That
looks
looks
okay.
That looks okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So generally, we have it in the code, like you're trying to get at 15 feet, but on that scenario, I think you still need to have 2 front yards. So, I mean, essentially, I'd just say strike it from there.
I mean, that's fine. It's just one of those things I was thinking through is, you know, ultimately our goal is to try to
And that is, I agree.
save some space and allow a little bit more development. Because I look at some of these side yards and they, you know, and this is just driving around a lot of cities, it's like they're out there and nobody uses them. And they're just,
And I completely agree.
so I understand your thinking as well, but.
Yeah. So there was that, and then on the R3 stuff, I think where you marked up on 4A and B, I think that's 65. If we go with that thinking, we need to make 65 60, and the next one at 75 needs to be 70. And then we need to add that requirement on the yard regulations, provided Article 5 to yard regulations on the side yard, so it's.
All right, where are you at?
So on,
Justin.
yeah, so on, sorry, 4A and 4B,
Mhm.
if you add up the 5-foot side yard setback, and then generally it'd be a 40-foot width that we can have for the house, plus the 15-foot that you talked about from the front yard, the non-primary, that'd be 60. Instead of the 65.
Okay, I'm not, maybe you've got a different, I'm looking at it because I've got 60 in my notes here, but,
It's on page 3.
Page 3.
yeah, page 3 of 13.
Yeah, I'm seeing 65 and 75.
Okay, well, I must have sent out a wrong version because I've got it, I did change those on the one that I have here in front of me, but I have got you.
It should be 60 and 70, not 65 and 75.
I got 60 feet in the width for the corn dragon, and I had 75 feet. Instead of 80, I had 75. So I do apologize for that if I,
So what is it on 4, instead of 75, it's, should be 65, is this correct here, is it showing on the screen, or is it, should that be 60?
I think that should be 60.
I think that's what. And then instead of 75, should be 70, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You guys agree with that? I mean, that's.
Yeah, that's what I said.
okay.
I didn't follow it, but I'm with you.
Yeah, so essentially on the 50-foot wide lot, we have a 5-foot and a 5-foot yard setback. So we're saying there could be a 40-foot wide house in there. So I'm just carrying that to the R3, saying you got 5 foot, 40, and then with the 15 on the corner, that minimum yard width on a corner lot needs to be 60.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
Wow,
I
that's
had a hard
scary.
time losing it.
You know, any pictures, do we?
Any other questions for Brad? Seeing how it's a public hearing, I'll open it up to the public. Anyone who would like to address this matter before the public commission, please approach the podium, give us your name and address. Seeing none, nobody online?
We do have Patrick online, I'm not sure which Patrick that might be. But I assume.
That's me, Mike.
Oh,
Sorry.
God.
I'm in the dark.
State your name and address for the record.
Okay, thanks, Patrick.
Yep.
Close the public hearing, then, and that is before the planning commission. Discussion, concerns, thoughts?
I've lived with 50-foot lots since I bought my house in '84, so I don't have an issue with it. other than you reach out your window, you're allowed to stick your hand in your neighbor's, but
I think it's something good for the city. I think it help reduce development costs. And everybody, cities around us are doing it. Projects I've worked on have worked, so I think it'd be a good thing.
I'm not opposed to it. It's a good idea.
I think it's a good idea. I guess it seems to me like most cities are dealing with this with some architectural features that, you know, essentially if you got a 40-foot house and a 24-foot garage, it looks like a big garage. So they, you know, put some porches on or offset the garage or things like that. The idea of having these houses appear to be dominated by the garages is not a problem. My artistic senses won't be offended by that at all.
But to be clear, we aren't proposing anything.
We're not proposing to
This would allow you to.
mitigate
Right.
the appearance of the house. So it looks like, I mean, you'd be looking at 24-foot of garage and 16-foot of house front.
Just to be clear, the two examples you gave us were, one, Lenexa requires a plan development, and Gardner had a number of other architectural requirements for folks that did this.
Gardner doesn't have architectural requirements.
They don't?
They do not.
Oh, no, misunderstood. I thought you were saying that they had to do something to break up the front of the houses or do something.
When I spoke with their community development director, they did go through that process.
They've abandoned that.
And back and forth with their development community. And I think there was a little bit of regret that they didn't get some of that in there, but once again, it came back to some of the discussions that I had with the developers that are wanting this 50-foot lot, and I just felt like you're gonna start, you know, and maybe they're just crying wolf a little bit, and you're gonna drive the price up, and we're not gonna accomplish anything here, and you know, sort of let the free market and the customer decide what happens with the garage widths and whether it's set back, you know, 8 feet, or there's, you know, some columns on the porches, or some of the things I had mentioned, hip roofs versus gables.
So they ultimately didn't.
They did not.
I would also say that on the projects we've been involved in, where it was a plan development with these architectural restrictions and things of that nature, the houses, the cost of the houses was surprising. I mean, they eventually ended up being as high, almost as high as a house on 7 floors.
That's true.
So if
with making this change, what do you estimate the difference is gonna be? We left it the same as it is now versus the new one. What's the difference in the price of the house is gonna be? Do you have any idea?
I really don't. I do know the ones in Gardner are, I mean, they're still selling for $330,000 to $375,000, and they don't have basements. They're just slab on grade, and it just, yeah, I mean, it's still kind of mind-boggling that that's the cost for a new house these days. But that's the cost for a house these days, and it just, I mean, they're nice homes. I've driven through those neighborhoods and looked at them. In fact, Drew, our recent hire in our codes department, he's buying a house in Gardner, he and his wife. So seems to be happy and thrilled they're doing it. I've asked him about the choice of the location, and you know, it came down to price point, you know, distance to work, things like that, and it's a good product, but you know, once again, it's still a lot of money for your first home. I couldn't imagine.
Well, I don't I don't see this as gonna open the floodgates of us developing affordable housing in the summer. I think this is gonna give some developers the opportunity to squeeze a few more lots in and build a few more houses. But I don't see this is gonna be a big boon for us dropping the price of housing. So,
The term affordable housing, I think, is long gone.
maybe so, but if that being the case, then, to me, I'm not sure this accomplishes much other than allows a few developers to squeeze a few more lots in. So, it's a policy question, I'm not a huge fan of it, I don't really oppose it. I mean, you know, you're right, we have plenty of houses around here that have been built on 50-foot wide lots. But they're historical as opposed to somebody dropping a new one. So,
I think where the costs are gonna be saved is the lot development cost. 'Cause
I'd like to think that's gonna make a difference in the price of the house, but I just can't.
I can't see how it would, I mean, it just makes a more competitive market.
Okay. We'll see. Anybody wanna recommend action on this, continue the discussion?
Brad, would you want time to review that comment about the corner lot widths on R2 before we, I mean, do you understand what?
Yeah, Justin and I had talked about that last week, and I do, you know, and I'll defer to the recommendation that the planning commission makes if you want to hold that and remove that 15-foot and just keep the language we have, which is you've got you're on a corner lot, you've got two fronts, and you're gonna have to maintain the 25-foot setback, which is, and so I could easily remove that with the recommendation to the council that the planning commission makes. You know, I just, to me, I just look at these side yards and they just seem to be a little like wasted space.
That's not really what you, I mean, that was one of your comments. You want to go back over what you're talking about?
On the R2,
The R2 lot widths.
well, yeah, that'd be on the main comment on the side yard setback on R2 was if it's not in the same block, like that would still have to go have the same side yard setback as the front. If it's not in the same block. So I guess what I'm getting at is if we would just strike 6D from the R2 comments, it would fall back to the code requirements that we have in place today and everything is fine.
Yeah, and I guess I told you my thinking. I don't know that 10 feet is visually gonna make much of a difference, but, you know, it's been kind of standard practice to keep that same two fronts, if you're on a corner lot, you have two front yards. So you keep that distance the same regardless. So you won't have this potential where somebody slides one over to the max allowed or minimum allowed.
But I guess if you're in the same block, just like what they had at Arbor Ridge, that 15-foot would apply. And it's in the code as it is today, that would work for the 15-foot setback. But if you have a house that's not in the same block.
Well, I guess what I would, either we leave it as is or not try to split hairs on whether they're in the same block or not. We'll just keep it at your corner lot and you have two fronts, boom.
Well, but beyond that, the minimum lot widths, you know, you were recommending a 60-foot for a minimum lot width
For the R3.
So for R3, yeah, so I think that needs to be updated.
and the 70-foot.
Yes, I've got that notation made.
Two recommended modifications. One is deleting 6D and then in R3 changing the 65 and 75 to 60 and 70. Back to Mark's question, do you need time to think about that or is that good?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Other discussion? Motion?
make a motion, we recommend approval of the changes to the R2 and R3 code modification based on the discussion this evening. Is it good? Or do I need to?
That would include the deletion of 6D and the modifications of 4, R3, 4A.
Correct.
Everybody clear?
A second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Roll call?
Manson,
Yes.
Templin,
No.
Lane,
No,
Huggins,
Yes.
Milburn,
Yes.
Schultz.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. I think that concludes our agenda. Anything else we need to talk about tonight?
tell the rain to stop.
It's just over this weekend, it's gotta rain.
I know.
Entertain a motion?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second. Moved and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
See you next time.
What's it doing? I thought it was supposed to be.
Yeah, I really thought it was gonna be done by now. It just keeps building back behind
Just
us.
keeps building right in the same spot, just sitting on it.
Sitting on us.
That's crazy.
I thought it was gonna miss.
You can what now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, you going to airport? Is the airport coming too? Okay, all right, that's good news.